In this chapter first, we will define psychology, provide a brief overview of its origins, and describe some of the major issues with which it grapples. An example: to what extent is our behavior shaped by experience versus built-in, inherited tendencies? Second, we will comment on the scientific nature of psychology, describing the scientific method, how it is used by psychologists, and how you too can put it to good use. Included here will be a discussion of critical thinking, the careful, cautious, and open-minded approach that is one of the key building blocks of all branches of science. Third, we will describe research methods used by psychologists in their efforts to increase our knowledge of human behavior. Psychology is best defined as the science of behavior and cognitive processes. Two parts of this definition deserve further comment. First, note that psychologists view their field as basically scientific in nature. Second, this definition suggests that psychologists view their field as being very broad in scope. Indeed, they perceive it as being concerned with virtually everything we do, feel, think, or experience. By the term behavior, in other words, psychologists mean any observable action or reaction of a living organism. Everything from overt actions, anything we say or do, through subtle changes in the electrical activity occurring deep inside our brains. If it can be observed and measured, then it fits within the boundaries of psychology. Similarly, by cognitive processes, psychologists mean every aspect of our mental life, our thoughts, memories, mental images, reasoning, decision-making, and so on. In short, all aspects of the workings of human mind. There were early battles over what psychology should study: the camps of structuralism, functionalism, and behaviorism. Structuralists, like father of psychology Wilhelm Wundt, believed that the field should focus on identifying the basic structures of the human mind. Functionalists were of the opinion that it should focus on the functions of consciousness. And behaviorists argued that only observable, overt activities that can be measured scientifically should be studied by psychology. India has a strong and variegated tradition of reflective scholarship, with rich insights into human psyche and behavior, much before the advent of modern scientific psychology. The goal of related deliberations was self-realization and alleviating suffering. The inner-directed discipline to regulate self-processes and fostering harmony of mind, body, and spirit seems central to most of the Indian accounts. In India, psychology was introduced as a discipline at master's level at Calcutta University in 1916. Dr. N.N. Sengupta, a Harvard-trained scholar, was appointed as the first faculty. The first doctorate in psychology was awarded to Gurindra Shekhar Bose at Calcutta in 1922 on his work on repression. In the course of its development, the academic discipline of psychology has been addressing several grand issues, large-scale questions or themes that cross-cut the field. The first issue deals with the fact that everyone remains sane to some extent and undergoes change in some respect. Thus comes the issue of stability versus change. To what extent do we remain stable over time, and to what extent do we change? We'll meet this issue over and over again in this book, as we address changes over time in cognitive abilities, physical functioning, personality, and other aspects of behavior. A second and closely related theme centers on the following question: to what extent are various aspects of our behavior shaped by genetic inheritance, and to what extent are they learned? This is usually known as the nature-nurture question. Does aggression stem primarily from innate tendencies, or is it the result of experiences that trigger it in a given situation? The answer to such a question is not one suggesting that either experience or heredity dominates. Rather, many aspects of behavior seem to represent the result of complex interactions between these factors. The third theme deals with rationality versus irrationality. Consider these. Have you ever underestimated the amount of time it would take you to complete a task? Have you ever lashed out at another person, not because of something he or she did or said, but simply because you were in a rotten mood? Psychologists are fascinated by these and other illustrations of the fact that we are not always perfectly logical, because such behaviors often offer insights into how the mind works. Be on the lookout for these three grand issues. They are central questions that have captured the attention of psychologists for decades and have played an important role in shaping the questions asked by psychologists in their research. The key point to remember is this: human behavior is extraordinarily complex and is influenced by many different factors. Thus, any aspect of behavior can be examined from many different perspectives. All these add to our understanding of behavior. Table 1.1 summarizes these contrasting points of view or approaches. Psychology is a tremendously diverse field and quite a large one. As shown in Table 1.2, psychologists specialize in many different aspects of behavior. As a result, there is always a lot going on, and the field develops and changes in many ways at once. Among recent trends, however, two seem so important that they are worthy of special note: psychology's growing attention to diversity and its focus on the possible role of evolution in human behavior. In addition, there is another important trend occurring, one that many psychologists themselves have not yet recognized: increasing use of the findings of psychology in other fields. For this reason, psychologists often use the experimental method. In its most basic form, the experimental method in psychology involves two key steps. 1. The presence or strength of some variable believed to affect behavior is systematically altered. And 2. The effects of such alterations, if any, are carefully measured. The factor systematically varied by the researcher is termed the independent variable, while the aspect of behavior studied is termed the dependent variable. In a simple experiment, then, different groups of participants are exposed to contrasting levels of the independent variable, such as low, moderate, and high. The researcher then carefully measures the research participants' behavior to determine whether it does in fact differ, depending on the level of the independent variable to which they are exposed. To illustrate the basic nature of experimentation in psychological research, let's return to the possible effects of magnets on muscle or joint pain. One way in which a psychologist could study this topic through the experimental method is as follows. First, the psychologist would recruit persons who had considerable muscle or joint pain as participants in the research. This could be accomplished through ads in local newspapers, by referrals from physicians, or in other ways. These persons would make appointments to come to the psychologist's office or laboratory. There, the psychologist would give them metal discs and ask them to wear these for some specific amount of time, e.g., for 1 hour. One group would receive real magnets, while another group, known as a control condition, would receive discs that looked exactly the same but were not magnets. This is the independent variable, whether people wear magnets or non-magnetized metal discs. At the end of the hour, participants would be asked to rate the amount of muscle or joint pain they felt as they performed a series of simple movements, e.g., raising their arms, moving their legs. They would rate their pain on a simple rating scale, e.g., 0 equals no pain, 1 equals mild pain, 2 equals moderate pain, and so on. Pain level would be the dependent variable. The psychologist would then compare the pain reported by the two groups. If the group that received the real magnets reported less pain, this would provide evidence that magnets are effective. If the two groups reported identical levels of pain, this would suggest that perhaps magnets are ineffective. In order to provide clear information on cause and effect relationships, experiments must meet two key requirements. The first involves what is termed random assignment of participants to conditions. This means that all participants in an experiment must have an equal chance of being assigned to each group in the study, an equal chance of being exposed to each level of the independent variable. The reason for this rule is simple. If participants are not randomly assigned to each condition, it may later be impossible to tell whether differences in their behavior stem from differences they brought with them to the study, from the impact of the independent variable, or both. The second requirement essential for successful experimentation is this. To as great a degree as possible, all factors other than the independent variable that might also affect participants' behavior must be held constant. In the magnet experiment, the independent variable, wearing magnets, is confounded with another variable, different treatment by the experimenter. This person is kind and soothing to those who wear real magnets, but rude and harsh to those who wear non-magnetic metal discs. As a result of this confounding, it is impossible to tell whether any differences between the pain levels of participants in the two conditions stem from the independent variable, the confounding variable, or both. One important source of confounding is subtle differences in experimenters' behavior that can influence research participants. Such unintended effects produced by researchers are known as experimenter effects, and they can be deadly to the scientific value of a research project. This is one reason why many studies in psychology employ a double-blind procedure in which researchers who have contact with participants do not know the hypothesis under investigation or the condition to which participants have been assigned. In sum, experimentation is, in several respects, the crown jewel among psychology's research methods. Why, then, isn't it the only method used by psychologists? One reason is that the other methods do indeed offer advantages, e.g., the vast amount of information that can be collected quickly through the survey method, or the high generalizability provided by naturalistic observation. Another reason is that in many cases, practical and ethical constraints prevent psychologists from using experimentation. While experimentation is a powerful tool and one often preferred by psychologists, it cannot be used to investigate all questions about behavior. Please see Table 1.3 for an overview of the advantages and disadvantages of all the research methods described in this section. There are primarily two methods for analyzing the experiments. The quantitative method that collects numerical data and uses statistics to test hypotheses, to measure, quantify, and find patterns or relationships that can be generalized. While qualitative methods involve interpretive study of a problem or issue in which the researcher is the key to the whole process of research, they yield data that are in the form of words, pictures, artifacts, etc. By providing thick or rich description and explanation of the underlying processes as they unfold in specific context, the qualitative researcher enables us to experience the chronological flow or sequence of events leading to certain outcomes. All research conducted by trained psychologists is currently performed in accordance with strict ethical standards designed to protect the safety, privacy, and well-being of all research participants, in which there should not be deception to participants. An informed consent before the experiment and proper debriefing about the experiment are cornerstones of the ethics in psychological research. Similar is the situation regarding ethics of research with animals. Many persons would contend that these benefits far outweigh the risks to animal studies in psychological research. This issue is a complex one, so there are no easy answers. Whether the benefits of research with animals, medical or psychological, justify such studies is a value judgment, largely outside the realm of science. Only you, as an individual who thinks critically, can make up your own mind. Human thinking is subject to several forms of error that can lead us badly astray. While these errors often save us mental effort, and may in fact reflect evolved cognitive mechanisms that are generally helpful to us, they suggest that we should be cautious about relying on intuition or common sense when trying to understand human behavior. Confirmation bias, the tendency to notice and remember primarily information that lends supports to our views. Availability heuristic, a mental shortcut suggesting that the easier it is to bring something to mind, the more frequent or important it is. These are some of the most common error. Critical thinking, thinking that avoids blind acceptance of conclusions or arguments, but instead closely examines all assumptions, evidence, and conclusions can help in overcoming us in avoiding these common errors. Although psychologists have not abandoned the goal of developing a body of knowledge that applies to all human beings, they have become far more aware of the importance of the tremendous cultural and ethnic diversity that is so much a part of our human heritage. And they now recognize that such differences must be included as a key part of our efforts to understand human behavior. As a result, psychology now adopts a multicultural perspective that pays careful attention to the role of such differences. Most people realize that several branches of psychology are applied. Not only do they seek to acquire basic knowledge about human behavior, they also attempt to put it to practical use. For instance, clinical psychologists help individuals deal with emotional and psychological problems, while industrial/organizational psychologists focus on solving practical problems relating to work. Knowing anything is based on our beliefs about the nature of things to be known, ontology, what can be known about that thing or object of knowledge, epistemology, and what are the ways we can find out those things, methodology. Taken together, these constitute a paradigm. Psychologists are generally inclined toward the use of scientific method in their effort to answer questions about cognitive processes and behaviors. The scientific findings are believed to have the following qualities. Cumulative. The studies in science are cumulative in nature. Therefore, any new work is based on earlier work. Verifiable. The results of scientific studies are such that they can be confirmed. The scientist should be able to replicate them by following the procedure used by the earlier researcher. Public. The scientific work is published and remains available to everyone who is interested in it. Communicating the findings in the public domain brings credibility to it and help furthering the process of research. Among the most important scientific method, the essential components are these. Accuracy. A commitment to gathering and evaluating information about the world in as careful, precise, and error-free a manner as possible. Objectivity. A commitment to obtaining and evaluating such information in a manner as free from bias as humanly possible. Skepticism. A commitment to accepting findings as accurate only after they have been verified over and over again, preferably by many different scientists. Open-mindedness. A commitment to changing one's views, even views that are strongly held, in the face of evidence that these views are inaccurate. To accomplish this task, scientists in all fields engage in the construction of theories, frameworks for explaining various events or processes. The procedure involved goes something like this. 1. On the basis of existing evidence, a theory is formulated. 2. This theory, which consists of some basic concepts and statements about how these concepts are related, helps to organize existing information and also makes predictions about observable events. 3. These predictions, known as hypotheses, are then tested by actual observations, by research. 4. If results of new observations are consistent with the theory, confidence in it is increased. If they are not, the theory is modified and further tests of its predictions are performed. 5. Ultimately, the theory is either accepted as accurate or rejected as inaccurate. Even if it is accepted as accurate, however, it remains open to further refinement as additional research is conducted. How do psychologists actually go about the task of adding to our knowledge about human behavior? Primarily, you'll soon see, through the use of three basic procedures: observation, correlation, and experimentation. One basic technique for studying behavior, or any other aspect of the world, involves carefully observing it as it occurs. Observation, accompanied by careful, accurate measurement. The use of such systematic observation takes several different forms in the study of behavior. Psychologists sometimes observe human behavior in the locations where it normally occurs. For example, recent studies have used such methods to study how and when people touch each other in public places. Every human being is unique. Each of us possesses a distinctive combination of traits, abilities, and characteristics. Given this fact, is it possible to learn anything about human behavior from detailed study of one individual or perhaps a few persons? Several famous psychologists have suggested that it is. They have adopted the case method, in which detailed information is gathered on specific individuals. The researchers then use this information to formulate principles or reach conclusions that, presumably, apply to large numbers of persons, perhaps to all human beings. At the opposite end of the scale, where systematic observation is concerned, is the survey method. Here, instead of focusing in detail on a small number of persons, researchers obtain a very limited sample of behavior from large numbers of individuals, usually through their responses to questionnaires. Surveys are used for many purposes: to measure attitudes toward specific issues, voting preferences, and consumer reactions to new products, to mention just a few. Surveys can also be repeated over long periods of time in order to track changes in public opinion or other aspects of behavior. To be useful as a research tool, however, a survey must meet certain requirements. First, if the goal is to predict some event, for example the outcome of an election, great care must be devoted to the issue of sampling, how the persons who will participate in the survey are selected. Another issue deserving careful attention is the way in which surveys are worded. Even changing a single word in a question can sometimes shift the meaning and strongly influence the results. At various times, you have probably noticed that some events appear to be related to each other. As one changes, the other appears to change too. From the point of view of science, the existence of a correlation between two variables can be very useful. This is so because when a correlation exists, it is possible to predict one variable from information about one or more other variables. The ability to make such predictions is one important goal of science, and psychologists often attempt to make predictions about human behavior. In this approach, psychologists or other scientists attempt to determine whether, and to what extent, variables are related to each other. This involves making careful observations of each variable, and then performing statistical analyses to determine whether and to what extent the variables are correlated to. What extent changes in one are related to changes in the other. Correlations range from -1.00 to +1.00, and the more they depart from zero, the stronger the correlation. For instance, a correlation of -0.82 is stronger than one of +0.23. Positive correlations indicate that as one variable increases, the other increases too. Suppose that a psychologist wanted to test the following hypothesis. Use of small magnets strapped to various parts of one's body reduces joint and muscle pain. How could research on this topic be conducted by the correlational method? Many possibilities exist, but one approach would be to measure both variables, the extent to which people used magnets and the amount of muscle or joint pain they experienced. The psychologist could measure magnet use by asking individuals to report the number of hours they wore magnets each day, or perhaps the number of magnets they used. Pain could be assessed by means of a rating scale on which the research participants would rate the intensity of the pain they experienced, e.g., from 1 for little or no pain to 5 for intense pain. The researcher would then analyze these two sets of numbers through statistical procedures. Statistics are a form of mathematics, to determine if they were correlated. If a positive correlation were obtained, this would offer support for the hypothesis and would suggest that magnet use may indeed be linked to pain reduction. So far, so good. But watch out, for we are approaching a real danger zone, one in which many people seem to get confused. For instance, it is quite possible that wearing magnets restricts people's movement. As a result, the more they wear them, the less they move around. This, in turn, might allow their injured muscles or joints to heal. If this were true, then it would not be the magnets themselves that cause pain reductions, but rather physical rest. In short, although the correlational method of research can be very valuable, it cannot answer the correlational method, a research method in which researchers attempt to determine whether, and to what extent, different variables are related to each other. Psychology, a Science and a Perspective 23, question why.